Hello there, neighbors. Just a quick mention before we jump into the episode. I've been posting a lot more short-form content on TikTok and Instagram. So if you would be so kind, stop on over to either of those platforms and check it out. It's in the same vein as the things that I talk about on the podcast. Once in a while, there's some content there that's a little bit more lighthearted and comedic than the podcast itself, but I think you'll enjoy it. And if you do, please like, follow, and comment if you would. Alrighty then, let's move on to the episode.
They will close your churches in this country. They go communist, and they're trying to. They will kill your people, and that's what they're about. They want to end religion. They have to end religion because their ideology doesn't work. If you have strong religion, people like you that are so incredible and love our country so much and love God. This is the greatest threat to our country since its founding, in my opinion, 250 years ago, what's happening right now.
That right there is the whole scam in miniature. Not an argument, not a definition, not a policy critique, just a panic button. The purest example of propaganda that you're likely to hear in 2026. Because if you can convince people that democratic socialism means communism, and communism means churches closing and religion disappearing and America collapsing into some Cold War fever dream, then you never have to answer the actual question. What are these people actually talking about? Healthcare, rent, wages, childcare, labor rights, public services. Whether corporations should be able to squeeze people until their bones make cartoon noises. Whether billionaires should have so much power that democracy has to approach them like a nervous intern asking if now is a good time. That is the conversation Trump does not want people to have. So instead, he reaches for the old red scare button, the one with the cracked plastic cover and the dust from 19 different Republican campaigns still collected on it. He presses it, and suddenly every policy that might actually help working people becomes communism. Affordable health care, communism. Rent freeze, communism. Higher wages, communism. Taxing billionaires? Oh, that's definitely communism. Possibly the most communism that has ever communed. And then, because this was a room full of religious conservatives he was speaking to, he added the church panic. They're coming for your faith. They're coming for your religion. They're coming for your churches. No, they are not. And that does not mean democratic socialism is above criticism. Of course it's not. It raises real questions: cost, taxes, bureaucracy, public ownership, how programs are designed, how power is checked, how promises become policy instead of just, bumper stickers. Those are serious debates. We can have those debates. But the whole, they are coming to close your church, is not a serious debate. That is what happens when the scare word is doing the work of the argument, the work the argument can't. So today I want to slow this down. We're going to define democratic socialism in normal human language. We're going to explain what it is not. We're going to talk about why America already accepts public goods in 1,000 ways. And then we're going to get to the part that makes the right really, really nervous. The billionaire worship. Because they're not afraid democratic socialism will destroy America. They're afraid that it might expand it. Hello, neighbors. You are listening to a Friday edition of Back Porch Files from your neighbor on the left, the podcast about progressive politics, human decency, and life on the blue side of America's ideological divide. My name is Don Spielis, and I am your host. And today we are going to be talking about democratic socialism. That's where we are going today. Not into a dusty political science lecture, not a graduate seminar where someone talks about means of production 17 times and then everyone quietly wishes they'd stayed home. We're doing the plain language version today. What democratic socialism means, what it does not mean, why it is not communism, why Trump keeps pretending that it's communism, and why that lie gets so much louder the second anyone asks whether billionaires have too much power in a country where millions of people are working full-time and still can't afford the basics. Because this is not just a vocabulary fight. This is a fight over who the economy is supposed to serve. So the first thing we have to understand is that in American politics, the word socialism is often not used as a definition. It's used merely as a trapdoor. The second someone says it, the floor is supposed to open, everybody falls into some Cold War panic, and the conversation is over before anyone asks what policy are we actually even talking about. That is why the right uses the word so loosely. It does not have to mean one specific thing for their purposes. In fact, it works better when it doesn't. Universal health care is called socialism. Student debt relief is socialism. Rent control is socialism. Public investment in clean energy, socialism. Strong minimum wage, taxing billionaires, socialism. Regulating corporations so they can't treat workers like disposable machine parts. That, of course, is socialism. And at some point, the word gets stretched so far that it basically means that anything rich people do not want to pay for. And once you notice that, it's hard to unnotice it, because the same people who scream socialism when a working family gets help are often strangely quiet when corporations get subsidies. They're quiet when billion-dollar companies get tax breaks, when entire industries get favorable rules written in their own handwriting. They're quiet when government contracts flow upward like some reverse waterfall. That's not called socialism. That's called business. It's called growth. It's called economic development. But when a regular person needs healthcare or food or housing support or debt relief or protection from being crushed by a corporation, suddenly everyone has to pretend Milton Friedman's ghost just saw a pentagram. And that is not an accident. The purpose of the word is emotional shutdown. When, if voters hear socialism and immediately picture breadlines and dictators and gray concrete buildings, secret police, and someone confiscating the family Bible, then they never ask what is actually being proposed. They may never ask whether their health insurance system makes sense or why childcare costs more than a mortgage. They may never ask why a billionaire can buy a social media platform, influence public debate, shape elections, avoid taxes, bust unions, and then be treated like a folk hero because, he wears a hoodie and he says the word innovation. The scare word prevents the next question. And the next question is always the dangerous one. Who benefits? Who benefits from people being afraid of public health care? Who benefits from making workers afraid of unions? Who benefits from convincing people that taxing extreme wealth is somehow tyranny, but letting extreme wealth buy political power is somehow freedom? That's why this matters, because when Trump says communism, he's not trying to help people understand democratic socialism. He's trying to make sure they never understand it. He wants the label to land before the meaning ever arrives. He wants the fear to do its work before the facts walk into the room. So before we talk about what Trump says democratic socialism is, we should probably do the thing he does not want us to do. We should define it. Democratic socialism, in plain language, is the belief that democracy should not stop at the ballot box. That's honestly the cleanest way to say it. It says democracy should not be something we practice for 15 minutes every couple of years and then abandon the second we walk into work or open a medical bill or sign a lease or fight with an insurance company or try to survive in an economy where every basic need has a toll booth attached to it. Democratic socialism asks a very simple question. Should ordinary people have more democratic power over the economic forces that shape their lives? Not simply the right to vote for a senator, not just the right to pick between two candidates who both show up at fundraisers in rooms most of us will never be allowed to enter, but actual power over wages, working conditions, healthcare, housing, public services, the rules that corporations have to follow, the way wealth is taxed, the way political influence is bought and sold, the way public money is used. That's the heart of it. Now, Democratic Socialists do not all agree on every detail, and that's important to know as well. There is no single enchanted scroll in a basement somewhere that every Democratic Socialist has to kiss before they can, announce their candidacy. Some focus more on strong public programs. Some focus more on unions and worker power. Some argue for public ownership of certain key industries, especially where private markets fail or where profit incentives are doing real damage. Some are closer to what people call social democracy, meaning a mostly capitalist economy with a much stronger welfare state, stronger labor protections, and more aggressive limits on the power of corporations. There are debates inside the movement, just like there are debates inside every political tradition. But in current American politics, when most people talk about democratic socialism, they're usually talking about things like universal health care, stronger unions, affordable housing, higher wages, paid leave, childcare support, tuition-free or more affordable public college, taxing extreme wealth, and making sure corporations and billionaires cannot run the country from behind the curtain like the Wizard of Oz. That's not exactly the stuff of a Soviet invasion. And again, the word democratic matters. Democratic socialism does not mean ending elections. It does not mean abolishing free speech. It does not mean one-party rule. It does not mean the state decides what you believe or where you worship or what you read or whether your church gets to exist. It means using democratic government and democratic pressure to make the economy answer to human needs instead of treating private profit as the only sacred thing in the room. That is why healthcare comes up so often. Because if your ability to see a doctor depends on your job and your deductible and your insurance network and your income and your zip code and whether some private company decides that your care is worth covering, then how free are you really? If you cannot leave a bad job because you will lose your health insurance, that is not freedom. That's just a leash. If your rent goes up faster than your paycheck every single year, and the landlord gets to call that the market, well, you call it panic. That is not some neutral law handed down from a mountaintop. That's a political arrangement. Democratic socialism says arrangements can be changed. It says the economy is not the weather. It's not a thunderstorm that we just have to stand in while billionaires sell umbrellas. It's made by laws, protected by laws, subsidized by laws, shaped by tax codes, courts, zoning boards, trade rules, labor rules, contracts, budgets, and of course, political choices. And if the economy is shaped by choices, then democracy should have a say in those choices, no? That's the idea. It has nothing to do with dictatorship. It has nothing to do with raiding churches. It's not some cartoon commissar hiding behind the cereal aisle. Just this: people should have more power over the systems that govern their lives. And that brings us to the thing that Donald Trump desperately wants to confuse people with. So let's clear the fog. Democratic socialism is not communism in the authoritarian Cold War sense that Trump is trying to invoke. It's not Stalin, it's not Mao, it's not gulags, it's not one-party rule, it's not the abolition of elections. It's not the government owning your toothbrush and your shoes and your lawn chair and whatever. It's not banning religion. It's not closing churches. It's not some grim government clerk standing outside your Sunday service with a clipboard saying, "Sorry, folks, your hymns have been nationalized." That is the cartoon version. And the cartoon version exists for a reason. Because if Trump can make democratic socialism sound like authoritarian communism, then he doesn't have to answer what democratic socialists are actually arguing for. He doesn't have to debate healthcare. He doesn't have to debate housing or wages or the power of billionaires. He just has to yell communism and let 70 years of American panic do the rest. And to be clear, this is not me saying communism has no history worth criticizing. Of course it does. There are brutal authoritarian regimes that use communist language while crushing dissent and controlling speech and restricting religion and imprisoning opponents and concentrating power. That history is very, very real. But that is exactly why Trump's rhetoric is so dishonest. He's grabbing the worst images of authoritarian communism and using them like some sort of Halloween mask for policies like universal health care and taxing billionaires. That is not analysis. It's theater. It's propaganda. Calling every democratic socialist a communist is like calling every speed limit a police state. It's absolutely not serious. It's not thoughtful. It's not even especially creative. It's just loud. And the church panic is the perfect example. Trump tells religious conservatives that democratic socialists are coming for churches because he knows that fear cuts deeper than any policy. If people believe their faith is under attack, they may stop asking questions about their material lives. They may stop asking why the hospital bill is so high or why their wages are flat. They might stop asking about why their rents keep climbing. They might stop asking why politicians who claim to defend working people keep handing the country to billionaires with a bow on it. The church panic turns an economic debate into a spiritual emergency. And that is the whole point. Once it becomes a spiritual emergency, facts are secondary. Details are just suspicious. Definitions don't matter anymore. You're not talking about whether Medicare for all is practical. You're talking about whether America can survive. That is how propaganda works. It does not ask you to think carefully. It asks you to feel threatened immediately. And this is why the word democratic matters so much. Democratic socialism, whatever you think of it, operates through elections and debate and organizing, civil liberties, public pressure, political pluralism, and accountability. You can vote for it. You can vote against it. You can criticize it. You can organize against it. You can write angry Facebook posts at 2 a.m. with the confidence of a man who has never read the article he's sharing. That is democracy. And if a political idea can be debated and challenged and voted on and limited and revised and expanded and rejected and held accountable by the public, then it is not the authoritarian nightmare that Trump is trying to sell you. It may be wrong in parts. It may be overly ambitious in parts. It may be difficult. It deserves scrutiny like anything else, but it is not the Red Army hiding in your church basement. And part of what makes that scare story work is that Americans have been taught something very strange. Public help is suspicious. Extreme private wealth is sacred. Now, one of the reasons the socialism panic is so absurd is that America already has a mixed economy. We already combine private markets with public programs, public rules, public investments, public guarantees. That's not theory. That is everyday American life. Public schools are not capitalism in its purest form. Fire departments are not capitalism in its purest form. Libraries don't ask whether you are a premium subscriber before letting you borrow a book. Roads, bridges, disaster relief, food safety rules, workplace protections, veterans benefits, unemployment insurance, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, public universities, infrastructure spending, farm subsidies, small business support. All of that is part of the American system, as I think we can all agree on. And no, the point is not that every public service is democratic socialism. That would be sloppy, and sloppy is how we got half the country thinking traffic light is Marxist because it was paid for with your taxes. The point is simpler. We already accept the basic idea that not every human need should be left entirely to private markets. We already believe, at least sometimes, that government has a role in protecting people from things like old age and illness and poverty and unsafe food and unsafe workplaces and disasters and fraud and monopoly power. We already know there are parts of life where let the market decide is a terrible answer. Imagine for a second calling 911 and being told, we have 3 fire suppression packages available today, bronze, silver, and Patriot Platinum. Now, Patriot Platinum does include ladder access, but only if your house is in our network. Nobody wants that because we understand very clearly that some things are just too important to be left to whoever can make the most money from them. And that is where the real argument lives, not in this childish choice between pure capitalism and scary socialism. America is not purely capitalist and has not been for a very, very long time. The real debate is where markets work, where they fail, who pays the cost when they fail, and who gets protected when things go wrong. And here is where the double standard shows up, wearing, a top hat and pretending not to be noticed. When corporations get tax breaks, that's considered business policy. When billionaires use loopholes, that's smart accounting. When industries get subsidies, that's an investment. When banks get rescued, that is stabilizing the economy. Defense contractors live off government money, and that's called national security, of course. Wealthy developers get incentives. That's growth. But when a working person gets help with food, or housing, or healthcare, or education, or childcare, suddenly the emergency siren goes off. Suddenly it's socialism. We are told America cannot afford it. Suddenly every dollar has to be inspected like it came out of, a crime scene. That double standard, it is not just hypocrisy. It's training. It trains people to see public support for the powerful as normal and public support for the ordinary people as dangerous. It trains us to accept government that is very active when wealth needs protection and very suspicious when people need help. And once you see that, the socialism panic starts to look less like a debate over economic theory and more like a security system around privilege. In America today, public programs are only treated as dangerous when the public is the one benefiting. And that does not happen by accident. It comes from the way that Americans are taught to think about wealth. And now we get to the part that makes the whole machine work. Americans have been taught to revere billionaires. Not just respect the success, not just admire their ambition or appreciate the fact that some people build companies and create products and take risks and so on. I mean revere. We are taught to look at extreme wealth as proof of something deeper, proof of genius, proof of virtue, proof of discipline and vision, proof that the person with the most money must also be the best person. Billionaires are framed as innovators and builders and risk takers and job creators and winners and disruptors and visionaries. Every title sounds like it was printed on a motivational poster. And the story goes like this. They earned it. They built it. They saw what nobody else could see. They took risks. They made jobs. They are the reason the economy moves. And if you are struggling, well, maybe you did not work hard enough. Maybe you made bad choices. Maybe you should have invented a payment app in your dorm room instead of spending your 20s doing something useless like, teaching children or stocking shelves or driving trucks or cooking food or repairing roads or whatever. That right there is the mythology. Extreme wealth is treated like proof of virtue, while ordinary struggle is treated as proof of failure. And once that gets into people's heads, it changes the entire conversation. Workers become replaceable. Public help becomes dependency. Unions are just greedy. Regulation is punishment. Taxes on extreme wealth are theft. Corporate power is freedom. And billionaire influence over politics becomes just another part of the weather. That is why I call billionaire worship the emotional security system around the economy. It teaches people to admire extreme power instead of questioning it. It teaches people that if someone is rich enough, they must also be wise enough to shape our public life. It teaches people that the billionaire is the adult in the room, and everyone else is just lucky to have a job in his shadow. And let me be very clear here. This is not an attack on success. This is not an argument that ambition is bad or entrepreneurship is bad or building something is bad or just doing well is bad. That's not the point at all. The issue is not whether someone can succeed. The issue is whether one person should have so much money, so much influence, so much media power, lobbying power, so much access to politicians, and so much control over ordinary life that democracy has to negotiate with them like they were a foreign government. That's the issue. Once billionaires are treated as heroes, any challenge to their power becomes suspicious. If billionaires are heroes, taxing them sounds like punishment. If they're job creators, regulating them sounds like sabotage. If billionaires are the source of prosperity, unions sound like greedy workers attacking the golden goose. If they are natural leaders of society, then democratic limits on their power sound tyrannical. And that's where the anti-socialist propaganda plugs directly into the billionaire worship. Democratic socialism threatens the billionaire myth because it refuses to confuse wealth with wisdom. It says ownership is not the same as virtue. It says private profit is not the same thing as public good. That someone can be very rich and still be wrong. Someone can be very rich and still be selfish. They can be very rich and still have too much power over people who never voted for them, never hired them, never consented to their power, and could not get that person on the phone if their life depended on it. That's the part the right just can't allow to become normal. Because once people stop worshiping billionaires as these mythological features, they may start seeing them as political actors. And if you see them that way, then the questions change. Why do they pay lower effective tax rates than teachers and nurses? Why do they get to fund elections? Why do they get to threaten cities and states over taxes? Why do they get to shape labor laws and housing policy and healthcare policy and media narratives and public debate? Why does the richest country in the world keep acting broke every time ordinary people ask for help, but somehow find a bottomless bag of coins when powerful industries need rescuing? That is why the word communism gets thrown around so quickly. Because maybe billionaires have too much power is much harder sentence to campaign against. It's harder to scare people away from that. It's harder to answer the question honestly. So instead, they dress the entire thing up in Cold War cobwebs and church panic. And once you understand that, the GOP's behavior starts making a lot more sense. The entire reason why the right reaches for the word communism so quickly is because the actual policies that they don't like don't sound scary enough on their own. Affordable healthcare doesn't sound scary. Paid family leave doesn't sound scary. Neither do stronger unions, affordable housing, cheaper prescriptions, taxing billionaires, taking on corporate price gouging. None of those things in and of themselves sound scary enough. So they have to rename the whole thing. They can't say, we are very concerned that working people may have too much health care. They can't say, we believe billionaires deserve more political power than nurses. They can't say, we're worried that if workers unionize, executives may have to buy slightly smaller yachts, and frankly, America cannot survive that kind of trauma. So instead, they say communism. That word does a lot of work for them. It makes public programs sound foreign. It makes economic justice sound authoritarian. It makes billionaire accountability sound like class warfare. It makes ordinary policies sound like threats to faith and freedom and the American way of life. And most importantly, it keeps the actual conversation from ever happening. Because if the debate is about whether people should have health care, the right has a problem. If the debate is about whether rent is crushing people, the right has a problem. If the debate is about whether billionaires should be able to buy influence while working people are told to be grateful for the crumbs that they get, the right has a problem. However, if the debate is about whether America will become communist dictatorship, where churches are padlocked and everyone gets assigned a government toothbrush, then suddenly they're back on comfortable ground. Ridiculous ground, yes, but comfortable. That is why Trump's church line matters. When he tells religious conservatives that Democratic Socialists are going to close churches or destroy religion, he's not making an economic argument. He's not even pretending to. He's not explaining a policy. He's not comparing systems of government. He's just activating a panic response. He's telling people, don't look at the rent. Don't look at the hospital bill. Don't look at the wage stagnation or the billionaire tax cuts. Don't look at the insurance companies. Don't look at private equity firms. Don't look at corporate landlords. Do not look at the people actually shaping your economic life. Look over there instead. The socialists are coming for you. That's the trick, and it's not a new trick. It's an old trick. Take economic anxiety, wrap it up in cultural fear, add a religious emergency, and suddenly people are defending the same power structure that is making their lives harder. That is why the scare word matters so much. Because socialism is not being used to begin a debate, it's being used to end one. It's meant to make people suspicious of anything public, anything collective, anything that asks whether the economy should serve more than shareholders and donors. It's meant to teach people that help is dangerous when it comes from the government, but harmless when it flows upward to the already powerful. It's meant to make billionaire protection feel patriotic. It's meant to make ordinary people feel radical for wanting ordinary things. A doctor, a decent wage, a home they can afford, a job where they're not treated like they're disposable, a government that shows up when people are struggling instead of only when wealth needs a bodyguard. That is not communism. That is a country asking whether freedom means anything if people are too broke and too sick and too exhausted and too powerless to live with any dignity. And that question is dangerous to the GOP because it points people in the wrong direction. Or I guess more accurately, it points them in the right direction. And that is where Trump fits so perfectly into this, because Trump's politics depend on turning economic frustration into cultural resentment. That's the whole move. People are anxious about money, so he gives them immigrants. People are worried about rent, so he gives them drag queens. They're worried about drowning in medical bills. He gives them woke universities. They're scared about what they're going to do in retirement. He starts yelling about trans kids. People are exhausted from working harder and falling further behind, so he gives them blue cities and teachers and civil servants and protesters and journalists and librarians and whatever enemy of the weak is currently being run through his outrage blender. It is not that culture never matters. Of course, culture matters. Rights matter. Schools matter. Speech matters. Religion matters. How people are treated matters. But economic pain is constantly being rerouted into cultural blame because that protects the people who are profiting from that pain. If your life is getting harder, Trump wants you mad at someone with less power than you, not someone with more. He needs people to be mad sideways, not upward. That is why democratic socialism is such a problem for him, because democratic socialism, at least at its best, points the finger back towards the economic power. It says, wait a minute, maybe your problem is not the immigrant family down the street. Maybe your problem is the hospital bill. Maybe your problem is the landlord. Maybe your problem is the employer who fights unionization. Maybe your problem is the insurance company that has somehow placed itself between you and your doctor and then had the nerve to say that that's freedom. Maybe your problem is the billionaire tax cut. Maybe it's the private equity firm buying up nursing homes and newspapers and housing and emergency rooms and anything else that still has a pulse and a revenue stream. Maybe your problem is not the person being used as the scapegoat. Maybe your problem is the system that keeps handing more power to people who already have more than they could spend in 10 lifetimes. That is what makes this politics threatening. It changes the direction of the anger. And Trump can't afford that. His movement survives by telling people that the people making their lives harder aren't the powerful, but the vulnerable. Not the billionaires buying influence, but the immigrants picking crops. Not the corporations that are writing legislation, but the teachers trying to make sure every kid in the classroom feels safe. Not the insurance industry, but the person on Medicaid. It's a politics of misdirection. Look over there. Be afraid of them. Blame them. Hate them. Just whatever you do, don't look at the people who are writing the checks. Don't look at the donors. Don't look at the industries. Don't look at the billionaires who somehow remain the victim in every story despite owning half the furniture in the room and most of the room itself. Democratic socialism threatens that because it makes economic pain political. It says your bills are not just personal failure. Your exhaustion is not just bad budgeting. Your insecurity is not just the price of freedom. These are choices. These are systems. These are priorities. And if they were built by politics, then they should be able to be changed by politics. That's the real panic for the right. Not that democratic socialism is going to end democracy, that it might expand democracy into places that the billionaires thought were all theirs. Now, again, none of this means democratic socialism is magic. It's not. And I think this part matters because if we're going to be honest about the propaganda, then I also want to be honest about the politics. Democratic socialism raises real questions. How do you pay for large public programs? Which taxes go up? Whose taxes go up? How much? Which industries should be publicly owned? Which should be heavily regulated? And which should stay private? How do you make government programs work well instead of turning them into some slow paperwork choked hallway where everybody is holding a number and quietly just, ready to give up? How do you prevent bureaucracy from becoming unresponsive? How do you make sure programs actually help working class people instead of becoming slogans that sound great at rallies and then collapse into mush when it's time to govern? How do you protect civil liberties? How do you preserve political pluralism? How do you make sure that expanding democracy into the economy doesn't become an excuse for concentrating too much power somewhere else? Those are all serious questions. And people can disagree with democratic socialism in good faith. They can say the costs are too high. They can say the programs are too broad. They can say certain industries should not be publicly owned. They can argue that markets solve some problems better than government. They can worry about bureaucracy and incentives and innovation and efficiency. That's all fine. That is a debate. That's what politics is supposed to be. A serious critique asks how the program works, how it's funded, who administers it, what trade-offs exist, what happens if it fails, how rights are protected, how power is checked, how ordinary people actually benefit. But Trump isn't offering any of that critique. He's never standing there and saying, I have concerns about the long-term fiscal design of universal health care. He never says, let's compare administrative models across mixed economies and discuss how to protect civil liberties while expanding public services. Of course, he's not saying any of those things. He's saying the socialists are coming to close your church. That's not a critique. That's a haunted house. That's the difference we have to keep clear. Disagreeing with democratic socialism is not automatically propaganda. Calling every proposal communism, that is propaganda. Worrying about the cost of a program is not propaganda. Telling people their religion will be destroyed because someone wants billionaires to pay more taxes, that is propaganda. Asking how government can work better is not propaganda. Training people to believe government is always tyranny when it helps them, but somehow patriotism when it helps corporations, that is propaganda. So yeah, let's have a serious debate. Let's argue about design. Let's argue about cost. Let's argue about power and let's argue about what works, but don't confuse that with Trump's scare performance. Because once you clear away the fog machine, the real question can finally come into view. So after all of this, once you strip away the scare word and the church panic and the Cold War nonsense and the billionaire mythology and the propaganda fog machine, the real question is not whether America is about to become communist. That is the carnival mirror version of the debate. The real question is whether democracy should have anything to say about the economy that governs most of our lives. Should billionaires have more power than the voters? Should healthcare depend on employment? Should rent be allowed to eat people alive while politicians tell families to budget better? Should corporations be able to buy political influence and then lecture working people about responsibility? Should workers have a real voice in the places where they spend their lives? Should public policy protect human need or private profit? Then delay retirement and skip dental care and drown in bills and then get told this is the best that freedom can offer. Those are the questions Trump does not want people asking. That's why he reaches for communism. That's why he reaches for churches. That's why he reaches for the oldest panic button in the Republican junk drawer, because he wants people terrified of a word so they don't focus on the conditions that made the word appealing in the first place. He wants people defending billionaires who do not know they exist while fearing policies that might actually help them. And if people keep worshiping billionaires as the natural heroes of society, then any challenge to their power will sound like an attack on America itself. How unpatriotic are you? But if people start seeing billionaires as political actors and not these mythological features, then the question changes. It stops being, is this socialism, and becomes, why do they have so much power over our lives? That is the question that the GOP does not want in the room. Because once it gets in, it starts knocking things over. The scare word is doing the work that they can't do with an argument. And the next time someone tells you democratic socialism means communism and churches closing and religion disappearing and America collapsing, listen carefully to what they are trying to make you afraid of. Then ask what they are trying to keep you from noticing. because they're not afraid democratic socialism will destroy America. They're afraid that it might expand it. They're afraid people might stop asking, is this socialism? And start asking, why are we living like this? All right, everybody, thank you so much for taking the time to download and listen to this installment of Back Porch Files from your neighbor on the left. I'm so glad you did. I think this is a topic that a lot of people have feelings about, and I would love to hear what yours are. You can go to the website, neighborontheleft.com, go to the contact section, and either DM the podcast via social media or use the email address. Let me know what you're thinking on this and anything else that happens to be on your mind in this arena. While you're there, you can check out the episodes section where you can download or stream any episode of the podcast that goes all the way back to the very first one. And there's also the blog section, and I post each time there's an episode of the podcast, and I include all of the sources that I use for the things that I share, which I think is very important these days. It's Friday, so I want you to have a good weekend, but I'll be back on Monday with another full episode of Your Neighbor on the Left. So in the meantime, stay engaged, stay kind, and have the kind of weekend you'd wish for others.